Click. You recall last time a little bit more that we were pointing out in the ordinary world that man will inescapably, unavoidably perceive the means toward ends in their secondary pursuits as becoming the aim itself, the means to head toward the aim, such as the defeat of one's apparent competition as being success as opposed to actually achieving whatever the initial aim was, as per such notions as conflicting political ideologies. And they both, no matter how diametrically opposed they may appear to be theoretically, socially, culturally, any other way, fascism and capitalism. And they would both start out with the same aim, all secondary activities that pass for sane. Anything that is not detrimental to the locale in which it is involved, either out there or in here, no matter how foreign it may seem to the person thinking about it, the ordinary person, such as fascism, or if you were Catholic thinking or Christian thinking about Islam, what little you knew. As far removed as it seems to be, they all start out with the aim, in some way, of happiness. The benefit of the followers, the completion of the people so pursuing the aim. But as we noted, it is inescapable. There's no way out. It will very quickly, just because of this, the way it operates, that the means itself, such as the political system, its success over any competitors almost immediately becomes the aim, as opposed to trying to actually complete the aim. Now, that being so, then, in other words, you've got to realize and just see for yourself, at the ordinary level, all the ordinary aims always become switched, confused, otherwise waylaid. Now, if you see that, not because it's a mistake and not because there's something wrong with humanity, but if you see what I'm describing using basically ordinary street-level ideas and terminology, if you do see that that is simply the way it works, that you can't argue the fact, you could not prove it to anyone, but you see that those who start out institutionally, individually, they start out with an aim, and the aim is always the benefit of the people involved. No matter how large it is, it doesn't have to be a nationwide or a political system. Just individual people, little small groups of people. Their aim becomes their overthrow, the overwhelming, the defeat in some way. And it does not have to be very aggressive, it does not have to be overtly hostile, but it becomes their success of whatever their plan was, as opposed to what the aim of the plan was. So, in a quite real sense, that no one else can see, and it would serve no purpose for ordinary people to see it. But in that sense, if you're following this intro, to pick us back up to speed, all ordinary aims become, almost immediately, as soon as they're expressed, as soon as they become viable in the legal sense, in the secondary world, they become confused in the sense that the aim itself is no longer the aim. They get switched. They are mugged in a sense and replaced, that the method becomes the aim. If that be true, then, I ask you, then, is it possible that only a revolutionist could actually have an aim? After all, if we're going to buy into this if we're going to buy into this unusual way to look, this unusual preface, if we're going to buy into this at all, then you would have to say, on the basis of that, that is, that all ordinary aims become in some way switched. They become in some way modulated such that the method of whatever it is becomes the aim, the triumph of the method. If that be true, and then I ask the musical, if not rhetorical question, is it possible that only a neurorevolutionist could actually have a name? One way to consider the answer to that would be to look at it on the basis that only, using our own preface here, our own setup to the punchline, it would be only a revolutionist that would be able to think without the necessity of having a competitor. It would only be some sort of non-street level, ordinary neural activity that could operate free of the gravity of the 3D world. That is, to be able to think without there being opposition, to be able to think without there being a second word in the dictionary, to be able to think without there being non-thinking, to be able to think without the use of antonyms. How about synonyms? Don't need those either. I'm taking the almost overwhelming silence to be that you don't really grasp the full significance, since it's hard to do at an ordinary level, of being able to think without there being some kind of erroneous competition. I bet if I put it crude right quick, some of you go, oh, and then just as soon you'll look off. That is, you couldn't be a communist unless there were capitalists. I knew it wouldn't work. All right. How about this? What if? How about all of this great dreaming, theorizing, fabulizing, and even active searching for the truth? Men have always been doing that, and I'm sure that most civilized men of yore and of now, if you ask what should be, what is the supreme search of man, what should it be? And everyone, in a fairly lucid moment, would say, to find the truth. And if you will note, other than in the section, I forget how it's listed in the Dewey Decimal System, it's the maniac section, whatever they call it. Other than that, if you will note, just ordinary men will say, with many cases with a certain degree of city pride, no, we have yet to find the truth. I've yet to find it, but I am well read. I've studied philosophy. Men have yet to find the truth. Now, what if the truth lies somewhere? I'm using their term now. This truth, what if it lies somewhere that no one's ever looked? Or for those of you taking serious notes in pen, not pencil, what if it's in an area where they cannot look? But let's go back to the easy version. It's in an area because this always sounds better. You figure out why. If it sounds like people have run amok, if it sounds like people have screwed up rather than... It would sound better to find out, as terrible as it may sound, that an elevator fell from the 112th floor of the World Trade Center, and they find out that it was some dunderheaded operator, some repairman caused it, other than to find out that nothing caused it. It just happened. No. So, you didn't lose your place, did you? So it sounds better to say, what if this thing that everyone calls the truth, and even the most intelligent will say, no, we have never found it. And try to strike a good profile. If they look halfway decent, say, no, and it shows that we're intelligent. To admit, no, we have yet to find the truth. We may have found, a little truth here and there, but the truth, no, the search is still on. And I said, what if it's in a place where they haven't looked? See, that is where it sounds as though it's a human mistake. Well, yes, that was a terrible thing that happened, but we found out there was a person that repaired that elevator yesterday, and it turned out the person had been drinking Cokes with aspirin dissolved in them. The man was in a strange state. Rather than to say they have not found the truth because it is in a place that men have not looked. Because, see, that sounds like, well, it's a mistake, and if I know it, then or somebody, we're about to clear it up. So everybody can run over there and go, oh, there it is. That sounds better than say in a place where they cannot look. right? Back to the subject then. What if it lies in a place where men have not looked? What if it lies in a place that this truth, whatever let's just assume it exists. It's a sentence, it's a little box, it's a rock, it's a monument, it's a piece of rib that came from a sandwich that Confucius ate and they passed it around in secret. What if this truth lies somewhere that men have never looked, and this place is where? I thought you'd never ask. What if this place is where there is no anti-truth? I'm glad that Raleigh Fingers and Boog Powell's not here to see our ERA, even though Boog wasn't much of a pitcher. Think about it. Humanity, the best of humans. And we're not questioning because the best of humans are... But the best minds all agree. We want to find the truth. We have searched for the truth. I've devoted a large part of my life to the truth. But the truth we have not yet found. And what if it's in a place where they haven't looked, but the place is where there is no non-truth? How do you know then why I would also threaten to say it's in a place they could not look? Even if the ordinary intellect could conceive of a place where there is no anti-truth, if it could just conceive of it, where would they find it? Because the first question would have to be, well, where is it? Which, of course, implies it has no choice. It implies that it's somewhere, which means there's a whole lot of places it's not. So would you save me some time and tell me where it is? Well, it'd have to be in a place where there is no non-place. Feels like we're being controlled tonight by the spirit, although he's not dead. But I was going to say the spirit of Chuck Jones, or how about Walt Disney, since he's dead? It's like some cartoon. They keep digging through the background, and the hole gets bigger and bigger, and then the reality of the backdrop flows in the hole or something. That's what I get for trying to help. The only way to find a location would be to recognize it when you were there. And the only way to recognize it when you were there is to be wherever you are not to start with, or you would already be there. No matter how one thinks, no matter how the ordinary intellect runs up and down the back alleys of the city neural system, if not the sewers, and it looks for the truth. It looks for an answer, the answer, some answer. Whatever it looks for, it has no choice except to, once asked, to rely on the fact that I will recognize it in some way when I find it. And don't make this real metaphysical, like where you might see the truth and not know it. Somebody's looking for a particular box. They're almost sure what it would look like with a certain carvings on it, a certain diamonds, or a certain size. They got some notion. The only way that they would ever look for it is without any analysis. There's nowhere else to take it. Is on the basis that in some way when I see it, I will have some hint. If I'm not absolutely sure, at least it will not merge. I will not look at it and think that it's part of a passing tuba player wearing a pith helmet. It will not suddenly in some way merge like a dolly drawing into the landscape. That in some way it will stand out. In some way I will recognize that this is separate from all this other stuff. Maybe that's it. Maybe that is the box. Maybe that is the fact, the truth I've been looking for. If somewhere behind the idea of the search for the truth being the supreme endeavor for humanity, given the fact that for 5,000 or 6,000 years, I think they agree, that man has had a, shall we say, striking lack of success. I mean, 5,000 years. God forbid that I should be a critic. We don't know all the problems humanity's had. A lot of people have, some of them been sick, a few of them lost their jobs. And so we don't know, but just off the top of your head, may I say that 5,000 years, at least of searching for the truth and not being able to find it by their own intelligent admission, I was just going to suggest, do I have to even suggest? Well, I suggest that something could be amiss. In other words, it's been the aim, if we're back assuming, which is not an unfair assumption, that humanity would say, the brain of humanity would say that the ultimate aim of life, of a decent, well-spent life, is to find the truth, or some synonym therefore. That being the aim. For 5,000 years, men would now say, we have apparently gotten down a little closer to the aim. But has that sent humanity into some sort of serious collective funk? Do we see humanity en masse wringing their little hands, giving up? No. Which there are several ways to look at that, like, boy, what a bunch of dunderheads we are. Or to look at and say, my God, what a bunch of troopers we are. 5,000 years seeking something, and we're not a damn sight closer, and yet no mass suicides. In fact, you don't see millions of people marching this planet with their heads down like, oh, shame on us. People are out dancing, making money, getting fitted for suits. Would this not lend itself to a person considering, if I may try to now slip back up on you, that not just that aim, but you can take that as a prime example, perhaps the example, but perhaps it is not possible to have an aim as long as there is an anti-aim, as long as there is a competitor, and the competitor is the backdrop. It does not have to be as crude as we were making it, as saying that X religion and Y religion are definitely enemies. But the backdrop is in competition of seeing the roadrunner run across the screen. He is in competition with the background. And since that is a fairly simple thing, if you have any talent, I guess, of doing animation, they can make the background vague enough, less colorful enough, using the laws of perspection to make the drawn figure stand out. Your eyes do it for yourself looking at a photograph. Your brain does it for itself on the basis of, I'll think about that. Everything operates on that basis that is polarized, and there is nothing non-polarized in the three-dimensional world. And therefore, to be able to think of anything, unless you're just standing around looking kind of vague and distracted like a dentist with an undergraduate degree in law, or a body and fender man who's just been served divorce papers. But if you're just, unless you're just standing around looking like that, if you're thinking about anything, there has been a successful competition instantly in your brain of that which you're thinking and that which you're not thinking. Or put very crudely and very directly, if someone says, can you tell me how to get, they pull up beside you and say, can you tell me how to get to 4th and Main? You go, All right, when you go, you're putting in focus the question. You're putting in focus of you're trying to immediately think of what street you're on when the guy asks you, and you're trying to think the best way to get there and which streets are one way. So to go, you take everything unrelated to that question. I say you, being the charitable bastard I am. Your neural system does it, but if you want to play along with this. So you go, and what you're doing with all this, is you're taking everything else, no matter how important it may be, such as, I wonder if she'll be home tonight. I wonder if I've lost any weight. I wonder if I'm going to turn my ankle again before I get home jogging. Or I wonder if this guy's going to shoot me if I give him the wrong... All this stuff. I wonder whether something about world affairs. You have to take all of that and you go, And it's a one competition. Some of you are an ordinarily sane person, that which you're trying to think now comes up into focus, and you're thinking, Fourth and Main, and then all the rest of this stuff about, I wonder how long the recession is going to last, all that goes in the background. That's the aim right then. If you're going to say, yeah, I'll tell you, it's your aim is to come to a description of how to get to Fourth and Main. Humanity, then, driven by life's needs, says that the supreme endeavor should be to find the truth, and no one can find it. Now back to where I seem to have lost everyone and you went off to chase ants. What if they looked in the wrong place? What if the best you can do, and not just to the question of Fourth and Main, how about the questions, if you want to look at it this way, from silly seriousness. Yeah. Seriousness, that was it. Don't put silliness. City seriousness. Questions about where is God? Why is life unjust? Why is my nose so big? These serious questions. I mean, that seem obviously, unquestionably more serious than somebody asking you where is Fourth and Main. The real questions about what should I do with my life, or what is the truth? It's the same thing. You have to take the competition. You have to take the basis of anything in the polarized world being able to stand out for you to think about it, and you have to push everything else aside, which is a form of competition. It is then a form that you're aimed at, all right, I want to find out what the truth is. So I'm going to take everything not related to this question, all things have to do with baseball, sex, food, screw all that. I'm going to think about real stuff. I'm going to think on this one question. I'm going to sit down under this tree and I'm going to think about it. You don't understand? You don't see it all? Why the aim cannot be completed? The method becomes the aim. That's why people do not commit suicide. That's one way to put it. To ask humanity. All right, you've had 5,000 years and you say that the most important thing is to find the truth. And sane, intelligent humanity says yes. And me being an out-of-towner, I say, well, I don't see any success thus far. No, you're correct. Well, plus I don't see you people wringing your hands or threatening suicide. No, we're not that sort. How can this be explained? Not in some psychological way. How can this be explained through near 5-degree physics? It is, from several ways, as we started this one tonight, that the aim, no matter what it is, in this case, the ultimate aim to find the truth, whatever the aim is, always becomes waylaid, submerged, merged, switched with, put into a magician's egg bag, if you don't know what that is. You put in the aim, you wave the bag around, you show it's empty, and then you reach in, you pull it out, and it's no longer the aim. It's the method. Everybody forgets that you dropped a rabbit inside, and you pulled out a handkerchief. Nobody remembers that, wait a minute, that ain't the way the trick's supposed to go. When you cannot pursue what appears to be an aim to some fruitful conclusion, and you don't see anything unusual about it, then what sorts of, if you were then pressed any further, if you were an ordinary person, went, hey, that is weird. Here I am, I'm part of a 5,000-year-old thinking system, and I was right in line with them. I was a current spokesman thinking about we got to find the truth. Now you pointed out, my whole genetic code tells me at that level that we're no closer than we were. Plus nobody seems astounded by it. Nobody's particularly upset. I hadn't been upset by it, but that is strange. What's going on here? Then that same intelligence might say, what we think of as being the method and what we think of as originally being the aim have in some way, and you can take your choice in there, it's all covered, merged, submerged, interchanged, to such a degree that what apparently was the aim is now forgotten. It's irrelevant. But that's not the end of it. It's not just an attack. Now back to me asking you to consider the fact that aims may not be available the realization of aims because you cannot look where success might lie. Back to the truth is an example that you could not find the truth unless you were looking for a place where there was no anti-truth, no error. And the ordinary mind can't do it. It's just impossible. It's not open to debate. But those of you doing math with indelible ink, it does make sense. Not in this lifetime, I'll admit. But it makes sense. Just to go a little bit beyond the kind of flaccid game of the 3D intellect. If you can pursue this at all in your own brain, you can think about it like this. It takes you to a place here where there is a battle with no combatants. It's a place where there's a contest with no contestants. It's a place of a game wherein there is no way to keep score. Which of course could lead us to conclude this section of tonight's program and saying, who in the hell would want to play that? Who in the hell could you get to play that? Well, do notice. No, don't. Well, let's all suddenly look off like we were considering a magician's egg bag, if not looking off to see what time it is, and then we'll look back and pretend that most of this first 30 minutes didn't happen. How about that? No, we can't pretend completely. I do want to ask you one more thing. Could you consider the multifarious possibility? I'll make it sound simpler. That there might be two forms of competition. The search for the truth, the search for anything, the search for a political, social, economic system to produce happiness, completion, fulfillment. Or for you to do it yourself, that you consider on your own that you have come up with some system you're trying to pursue, some paradigm of thought, some way in which to live and behave, some ritualistic maneuvers that you are certain that will bring me happiness and completion and a lot of goodwill and make my nose go down. If within this kind of competition, could you consider that there might be actually two forms going on that we could... The temptation is to call one of them real, but they're both real. To call one real and call the other one secondary. But I'm not going to do that, so just assume I didn't even say that I started to. Of course, those of you who are getting good to your own brain, it's fine with somebody if they knew what they were doing, say, well, I started to say so-and-so and then change my mind, and so I won't say that, and then say it anyway, and then so we'll ignore that. Of course, if you're ordinary, you'd think, well, the thing is, he just misspoke. He didn't mean to say it. I hate to cheat, but can I tell you, I didn't mean to say all of that. And you can consider all this parenthetically because the possibility, you do it sometimes yourself at a mechanical level, which doesn't matter, but you can do it to yourself. That is, I'm not going to tell myself what I'm doing. Yeah, but you already did. No, you don't know how it works. And you mean I just said 2 minutes ago that I was going to kind of simplify it. All right. Do I have to repeat all that? Would it help? I'm tempted to say there are two forms possibly of competition, and I almost wanted to call one of them real and call the other one secondary, but I shouldn't because they're both real. Well, wait, ignore it because I shouldn't have said that I even thought about it. See, that's where we were. Now I said, well, the possibility is, well, the guy just misspoke. His tongue ran too fast, he wasn't paying attention. He said it, and then he said, I never mind that. And I was being dirty enough to say that that was not true. I did it all on purpose. And then to say, to do it to yourself. Because it happens accidentally to yourself. And out in real life, it ends up people trying to call down upon the name of Zeus and Freud in their unconscious mind. But you can do it purposefully. Sometimes backing up doesn't help, does it? Well, it gives reverse gear some exercise. They are both real, but I was going to say that you could consider the possibility of there being a primary form of competition and a secondary form, but they are both real. Now, a crude intellectual perception could undoubtedly, predictably say that one is more real than the other, since some people's ordinary perception would even give rise to relative degrees of realness. Because at the primary level, there has got to be competition. We are fighting for food and space, and etc. But those that can see a but beyond the crudest perception, you would have to see that nowadays a secondary form of competition is no less de rigueur to the ordinary growth of life for your own civilized, for your own contemporary existence. It is, even if you get a glimpse of it, it is harder to keep track of, to say the least of trying to describe it. It is much harder to keep track of, to say that there is continuously, simultaneously with me, constructively speaking, for all parts of this planet, there are two forms of competition going on. The primary competition continues to go on, even if you're not out with an axe, with a bow and arrow, trying to hunt for food. And of course, some of you know what a battle that can be, to take your little axe and have to fight a whole bushel of potatoes. Plus, some of those bastards can run. I mean, but at any rate, in a sense, you're competing to go get in line at the drive-in over at Burger Doodle. You're in competition primarily for food, to go out and look for a job, to make enough money to eat. But you are now simultaneously, and just as importantly, the job is not just primarily to put food and shelter into the structure of your life. Now it is a secondary aspect of the kind of job, the social position of the job, what it might do to your apparent position in life, and all the private aspects of an intellectual life. The secondary competition between ideas, between what would seem to be personality competitions amongst people, are no less important nowadays. They can't be separated. They're not more, but they're no less important nowadays than a very crude, primary, animalistic, physical form of competition. I started to say it was very hard to keep these in mind at the ordinary level. It'd be like if you had it'd be like the difference if you had a cage, a huge cage full of pet mice, and then you had another cage filled with the world's largest rogue elephant. It'd be the difference in trying to remember the difference between the two. That's disheartening to try to help twice in one night and to have the success. Of Pete Rolls at a liars convention. Or to be as welcome as Oscar Wilde at a Big Brothers get-together. I don't guess I'll push that parable any further. I don't mean, no, I didn't mean Oscar Wilde. I meant the cage full of the pet mice, as opposed to having this other cage with the world's largest elephant, and the difficulty of trying to remember the difference in the two. I thought perhaps a piece of physical business might help me. Well, for revolutionist purposes, they're both there, but who would know it? We'll now honor our threats and actually change it. There has been, throughout the history of man, a certain idea that has floated through religion, philosophy, and you can find it in other aspects I don't have time to go into, but down to pretty crude myths, fairy tales, cartoons. It's almost like a paradigm behind any sort of intellectual achievement. And this basic idea floating through, the most common manifestation is like a story that will go. And the story normally is supposed to be some wise man or somebody who actually was pursuing the aim of renewed intelligence or a new intelligence. And the story goes like this. One of the classic examples, and I won't even try to change it. The man says, suppose this sage, suppose this person that had some success, it goes like this. Once I looked at the mountain and I saw a mountain. Then I looked at the mountain and I saw a metaphor. And now I look at the mountain again and I see the mountain as a mountain. End quote. All over, not this planet, all over, not just the history of man, all over, not just, yes, just, the DNA of man, are the individual clusters known as individuals, feel as though there is some real significance to this idea. And it is taken, I'm not sure that's ever been analyzed in the city to this degree, but this is not hard for you to hear verbally. It is taken, when it is taken as being fraught with significance, if not pregnant. I didn't do it with significance. It's on the basis that the last 10 words, more or less, but now I see the mountain again as a mountain, that is taken as the conclusion of this search. It is taken as the successful completion of the aim that this man, this monk, this thinker, this seeker of the truth says. If you want me to fill in some of the others, when I started, I looked upon a tree as a tree. I saw a mountain as a mountain. And then I undertook this great search. I began to think, ponder, and etc. And the day came that I looked and I no longer saw a mountain as simply a mountain. It's like, boy, I was wising up. I was no longer just your everyday walking around body and fender man. The dentist paid me to say that instead of picking on them. The line, I'm just expanding the original short version of the idea. The person then says, the idea in humanity says, then the day came, after much struggle, some degree of insight, I no longer saw the mountain just as the mountain. I then began to see the mountain as a metaphor, a parable, comma. Now we're going to assume that some time later, 20, 30 years later, of more struggle, thinking, he says, but now, and we're moving. There's no doubt about it. It's moved. But he says, now, in my additional wisdom, in my later years, my insight is now taking me to where I again see the mountain as a mountain. Now, taking it at some level, very crudely, if I were out wasting my time talking to dentist and cold call salesman, at first you could say, well, boy, what a wasted life. I mean, the guy ended up where he started. But now we're going to assume that anybody hearing this has many more metaphorical genes lurking in your underwear. And you would be the kind of person I'm talking about that would go, no. That's not a wasted life. That isn't that the guy started out saying, when I started out, my name was Fred Gruntrapper, and I was a dumbass. But after much search and meditation and going through certain guru schools and studying with metaphysicists and metaphysics with strange people, I began to see myself as almost a metaphor for the hunger, the need of humanity, that I was not simply the old me. I was not the old me that I thought was full of flaws and shortcomings and too short, too tall, too overweight. I began to see me as a living metaphor for the hungers, for the needs, for the desires of all humanity. And the more I worked on it, I worked and I worked and I worked. And now, here in my later days, in the twilight of my years, as wisdom begins to hang around me like the patina of an old Cadillac that has not been waxed, I now no longer see me, figuratively speaking, I no longer see me as a metaphor for humanity. I now am back to seeing me as me. Ordinary intelligence could say, that's all you're saying. You forgot all those mountains and trees. And so if that's what you're saying, you're talking about a man who wasted his friggin' life. That would be a very crude and not unexpected. But we'll assume that people hearing this have at least a foot up on that sort of thinking. And we go, no. There is something deep there. It is showing that someone in some way, and I'm going to start real quick analyzing this in case you can't do it for yourself, taking what would appear to be at city level, almost a little higher, attempted look at life and thinking of life, and to take this idea. They'll say, no, what's going on here is a man who started out, and he's saying, when I started, in my younger days, I looked upon me, I looked upon life, I looked upon the mountain, and when I saw the mountain, when I looked at it, I saw a mountain. Crude. Very childlike perception. You look at it as being the early years of human intelligence. That you turn around to a kid and you say, what's that? And you point to a rock, and the kid says, a rock. And you don't expect a kid, when you point to a rock, for a kid to say, a potential weapon in the wrong hands, or something. Or to look up and say, it looks as though it might be a frozen teardrop from the eyes of the cosmic forces. You point to a rock and the kid says it's a rock. So, somebody representing those that would feel as though the idea that I relayed had some greater significance. It was all right, the person is reflecting, when they start with, the ordinary beginning, the childlike intelligence of man, because they're simply saying, when I was young, at least intellectual, I looked at a mountain and I saw a mountain. But then as I grew, as I began to be more experienced, as I began to think of things, I looked back one day and I looked at the mountain, and it was no longer just a mountain. It was now a metaphor. And we could stop there. I can do things with that. You can. All the things, from great wide intellectual vistas that you could say, well, the mountain began to represent the connectedness of all life, the power of nature, all sorts of things. And then you could say, well, then later, the man went past that. His intelligence, his insight became such that in some way he was no longer wrestling with metaphors and trying to struggle through some kind of spiritual or metaphysical jungle. His eyesight became clear again, almost childlike, even though he's now in his later years. And he then realized, wait a minute, there's something even beyond the mountain being a metaphor. I now look back and I reflect, and the mountain's just a mountain. Would say many people, would say part of life's nervous system through man. Heavy. It takes the latter part, and just the way I'm describing it, takes the latter part as being the final conclusion. It's like the ultimate insight. As well they should, as they're supposed to. But might I suggest to you that that is not complete digestion, because to fulfill what would appear to be a certain kind of circular, and I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, but in this kind of description of I saw the mountain as a mountain, and I saw a mountain as a metaphor, but now again I see the mountain as a mountain. That sounds as though it is some conclusion. It feels to many people's nervous system that is an adequate, an admirable, the sought for insight. Oh, if I could just get to that point. That is not the end of something. It is a fair reflection, or I wouldn't bring it up. The story is so widespread, whether you know that particular version, it's everywhere. The Garden of Eden, all religions, the idea of paradise, it's all the same thing. You're just going to fill it in. That's not the end. That is not a conclusion from a subversive sense. That is the beginning of something. Because the beginning of something then would be to continue to use their own words, their own description of it. It would then be not, I have reached a place. I no longer. Right quick, I'll back up again. I'm past the part of the ordinary, my ordinary intellectual peers, to where they look upon life, which is what the mountain is, that they look upon life and somebody says, boy, what's that over there? And they point to a communist and he says, well, that's a goddamn communist. Or what's that over there? That's a Presbyterian. Jesus, I know that. That's a Presbyterian. That's a rock. That's a mountain. I got past that. I began to see it's not simply that my adversaries are people different from me, anything separate from me, that mountain is not just a mountain. It's a metaphor. And in a sense, I am not even separate from that mountain. The mountain and I are one. All of you have been through some form of that, even without drugs. In that sense, then life becomes a metaphor, and it is, without any doubt, a sense of, well, at the ordinary level it is. I don't mean it's a dream any more than city life is. But it is a form of progress that I no longer look upon my potential competitors, somebody of a different religion, somebody across the border there, another country, or even another entity, the mountain, the tree, or me, the me I don't like, the old me with warts and overweight. I no longer see that as separate from me. At the very least, what I'm looking at is a metaphor, because it's not only, for those of you really ticky, it should be, say, symbolism, but everybody says metaphor, that it's not only what it is, the mountain is a mountain. I'm not nuts. The tree is a tree. This guy over here, although he is a Presbyterian communist, even though he's that, he's also something else. That life, things that the person looks upon, becomes a metaphor, becomes a parable. At that level, that is progress. But then it would strike people, without them being able to analyze it, but that then the next stage, the completion, is that you no longer look upon life and it's all some sort of metaphor, some parable, some simile, some symbolism, that in some way you then begin to look back upon life from a new, higher position, and it's no longer a metaphor, and that the mountain is again a mountain. Of course, there's a twinkle in the sentence, a sly wink that obviously you don't look upon the mountain the same way you did when you started. It's with some kind of renewed vigor. It's with some kind of new insight. It's like you have run all around the world to get back where you started, but it's not a waste of time, because now you know I was there to start with. That when I looked upon the mountain, I thought, well, the mountain's got to represent something else. When I looked upon that which I disagreed with, it had to be something else. When I looked upon the folly of other people, I knew something was wrong. And then I began to see, as I was traveling around the world, that their folly, what I call their folly, what I call the mountain, what I call somebody else, became a metaphor. And I'm walking, let's say you started in your journey in Indianapolis. So here you are, Burma, Thailand. You're halfway around, and now you no longer see these other things as simply being the things, the mountain. Now you're on the other side of the world, and you suddenly begin to see them as metaphors. And finally you get back. You didn't necessarily know it, but you get back and suddenly you look around and you're back in Indianapolis, but you look around in the mountain. And you can say, well, I'm back where I started. Now I'm back looking at a mountain. And now, for the first time in X number of years, I look again and the mountain is just a mountain. Yeah, but that's not the same as those stay-at-homes that back when you and they were both kids, and you looked up and you said, what's that? And they said, a mountain. So here it is 60 years later and you're back. And somebody says, what's that? And you think it's the mountain, and they all go, sure, it's the mountain. But then in some way you smile. As if somebody to smile at. Because, yeah, it's just a mountain. But, boy, I went around the world to find that out. And my knowledge now, my perception is that the mountain is the mountain, is far removed from you people, you rubes. So apparently some kind of metaphysical, spiritual, transcendental success has been achieved. That's just the beginning. At the city level, that's as good a hobby as any other. But to spend 60 years, or whatever it took, 60 minutes, and to be able to do all that and get back and suddenly, or again, you see the mountain, you see life, even Presbyterians. Not as simply mountains, life, and Presbyterians, but as metaphors. Then a little further on, but now the time has come that I again see them as such and such. Maybe it takes 60 minutes. That's still not a conclusion. Nothing has happened. That would be the beginning from a subversive view, because now what this really represents from a more subversive view, from a non-polarized view, is now what it means is that for the first time, the mountain, life, could speak to the person without there being an intermediary of a metaphor, a parable, a symbolism. That was the punchline, if you're waiting. But the first one sounded like a darn good punchline. Back to the point that I now see again, the mountain is the mountain. You can take that as a third step. It's really one step. Because now what it should be is, well, now the mountain, that is life, can talk to me, and I don't have to listen to those bloody metaphors anymore. Not that that's a conclusion, that now I see the mountain is a mountain. That'd be the beginning of, whew. And then whatever life the mountain had to say, you can hear it, and it doesn't have to go through the translator of metaphors, parables, symbolisms. Because apparently at city level, nothing of any consequence can be known, can be understood, can be learned, can be grasped, can be conveyed, unless it is through what? Rod Serling's spirit, is he back again? It has to be, ooh. Well, why else do you have people dressed up in funny clothes in these big old buildings, making signs and lighting candles, putting out candles, selling candles, doing things with candles that I don't care to go into? All of that is not just a religion, it's not just an institution, it's not just the people dressed up in these funny suits, requiring all these strange things of sit down, stand up, kneel down. And that's even without the benefit of Jim Henson being here more to run that show. All of that, the Pope, the churches, all institutions are metaphors. I know they exist, I know they got buildings, but they are metaphors. Everyone, even if they're not religious, this whole idea of seeking the truth, they will admit that an ordinary person, just me, just average Joe. How'd you know my name? Just average Joe. You know, I can't go out and confront the truth. I'm not going to find out what's going on. I want to know, but I need some kind of help. And so you go to some kind of institution, whether it be religious, philosophical, academic. But the institution is not the building of Harvard, it is not Notre Dame Cathedral. What they act as are metaphors. And people take that as being success. Well, I feel much better now that I'm back to my church, back to my religion. And I go there where I can go inside this great building, the likes of which I'll never be able to afford. I couldn't afford to put one of these things. I couldn't even afford to buy those kind of gold dresses that the priest wears. But now I feel I can go in there and ask them, so to speak, either ask them directly or you ask the guides through this institution that you're now a member of, and you ask, what's going on? What's going on? And you find out, they say, we don't know. We don't know. Except that's not the way it comes out. And you take that as a metaphor. In other words, I feel much better. Again, I point out, people are not out burning down churches. They're not out killing psychiatrists. Wherein, from one view, if you look at humanity, with their stated aims, whether it be to undergo analysis, to follow a political party, to follow religion. They've had 5,000 years, and if men are, as they claim to be, and I'm not questioning it, they are rational creatures bent upon their own pursuit of their own self-interest, and you ask them, does religion work? Nope. Does psychiatry work? Nope. Does a political system work? Nope. Have you ever found the truth? Nope. But notice, they don't turn around and kill everybody. They don't kill themselves. It just goes right along. Thus, they are satisfied in what appears to be an adequate conclusion to episodic thinking, to aims now being mistaken for their methods. And they would take the idea that I am back to the point now that in some way I see life as simply what it is. That is no conclusion. That would be the beginning, to take that same story, of a revolutionist then being able to hear life talk and not go through anything. Because the word metaphor, I got to tell you, is just a symbol for something else. And of course, I can't tell you what that is. But no longer does the mountain, that is life, no longer has to talk to you through anything. Much less a metaphor, which is simply a metaphor for everything else. It would be the beginning. It's not a conclusion. It is not a moment of enlightenment, epiphany, that suddenly after this lifetime of meditating and candles and priests and whatever, that I once saw a mountain as a mountain. Then I saw a mountain as a metaphor. And now finally, it just struck me, I'm back now, I see. Look at a mountain and now I see a mountain. No, that'd be like, well, all right, the commercial's over. Now I get down to something. Because it's now, not that you see it, but it's now that the mountain can talk to me and I don't have to go through this crap again. That a mountain's a metaphor, or a mountain's a mountain. No, now a mountain's a metaphor. What can you say when you're out of shape? Is it already cut off? Everything's still going? Yeah. Quickie. The inference being tied to something else we already talked about. Is if you can see that, which is what life, this kind of stuff is in a sense you're talking to life at a different level. Not spiritual, not some spooky way, but you're getting closer to a 5D view of a 3D operation that is otherwise inexplicable. In that sense, some of the description that we'd use in the last few weeks, you could say, if the mountain could then talk, that is life, could then talk to you without there having to be an intermediary, a translator of metaphor, symbolism, even words itself. And back to one of the descriptions, you could say then that you would have a revolutionist being able to, in his own way, individual way, to think, to talk directly. And if an individual can do that, then how much less are you going to imagine that life can do it, that it's there? That is the mountain. You don't simply see it now, past the point of it being a mountain, into a metaphor, and now past that and it's back to a mountain. It's not that. It's now that that whole thing was a metaphor to start with. Now, the son of a bitch can talk. Don't ask me what it's going to say. Because if I told you what it's going to say, all I could tell you would be a metaphor. But if an individual can do that, as we were inferring for the last few weeks, off and on, if you recall, about plain talk or plain speech, and how it's not possible, how it is not a usable occurrence at the city level, but how internally you can see what it is. You'd have to be at a new place here. You can't stay in Indianapolis. It's a shift here. But if an individual can do it, how are you going to imagine any less that life itself can speak very plainly, very directly, does not need a translator, does not need an institution, and is great, and it does seem to be great, but is great as admirable as it would seem to be for an ordinary intellect to think metaphorically, to talk metaphorically, to be able to hear metaphors and go, That passes for being somebody more intelligent than a ditch digger. But there's something beyond that. Not way beyond. It's just right after that, because all that's just a preface of life being able to talk without an intermediary of a metaphor. Now do you feel better? Now go to bed and get warm.